there's this podcast called How Did This Get Made? Where Paul Scheer, Jason Mantzoukas, June Diane Raphael, and a guest get together every other week to discuss a shitty movie. In June 2011, Matt Walsh, who you may know from Veep, was invited on the show, and he specifically wanted to discuss one of the later works of Mike Myers. At this point, it might help if we just lined up Mike Myers' film career, specifically the movies he himself wrote. Wayne's World, So I Married an Axe Murderer, Wayne's World 2, Austin Powers 2, Austin Powers 3. To be clear, this is the portfolio of someone who doesn't capture the social zeitgeist, but rather shapes it. He did this by leaning into himself. Wayne Campbell is an extension of himself as a teenager. Austin Powers was inspired mostly by films his late father watched habitually. After some other stuff happened in his life, Mike Myers wrote, produced, and starred in The Love Guru. And it went how it went. Which brings us back to How Did This Get Made? The podcast's titular question wasn't rhetorical. The Love Guru is juvenile, goofy, and aggressively Canadian, leading the show's host to openly wonder how The Love Guru got made. Okay, here's the thing. In 1996, the Austin Powers script surely looked like a sucker's bet to a typical film producer, and that movie spawned a cultural behemoth of a franchise. So Mike Myers was always going to get a lot of leeway. Certainly there are other problems with The Love Guru that are more quantifiable. It's overwritten, it relies heavily on jokes about bodily waste, and above all else, it is a comedy centered around enlightenment and positivity, despite the fact that comedy, as Matt Walsh points out, has very little to do with growth and learning. If there is a lesson here, it's that leaning into yourself only works until it doesn't. Two years before The Love Guru hit theaters, Magic released the most navel-gazy 3-set block of cards the game had ever and will ever see. Future Sight deals with the future. Planar Chaos examines alternate timelines, and Time Spiral looks backward. There are 281 cards in Time Spiral, not counting basic lands or the time-shifted sheet. Every one of those cards references something, and we're going to cover every single reference that every single card makes. Instead of going in collector number order, we're just going to hop around, because that's way more fun. I want to start with Lotus Bloom. This right here is what screenwriters would call the promise of the premise. I'll boil it down as best I can. Every film has a premise, and non-amateur filmmakers always spend a significant portion of their movie exploring the promise of the premise. If you're a Snyder head, you might know this part of films better as the fun and games. For example, in Billy Madison, Adam Sandler plays an idiot who has to retake all of grade school in order to inherit his father's company. That's a hell of a premise, and the unspoken promise of that premise is that, to put it succinctly, hijinks will ensue. Those hijinks indeed end up comprising about 3/4 of the film. The promise of the premise of a Magic set, where they're going to go back in time and reimagine old cards with contemporary design principles and new mechanics, is on full display in Lotus Bloom. It's Black fucking Lotus, but it has Suspend. You can't use it right away, and thanks to its total absence of a mana cost, a bit of engineering from our Wote, Saviors of Kamigawa, you can't really go off looping it out of your graveyard or whatever unless you really mean it. Overall, cool card, and it should get you excited about the set. You're gonna need that energy because, spoiler alert, a lot of these cards are based on designs from Fallen Empires. Here we go. Okay, Felon of Havenwood. This is an important one to stick near the top because there are Thalids all over this set. So their backstory, I don't want to use the word important here. Let's just say necessary. So, Fallen Empires. The story for this set is not actually the worst, despite how bad the set itself is. It's about the aftermath of Urza setting off the Golgothan Sylex and its broader impact on Dominaria. But Titanic isn't a story about a big boat sinking, it's a story about Jack and Rose. So to tell the story of the fallout of the Sylex blast, Fallen Empire zooms in on a remote Dominarian island called Sarpedia, and on this island, the Havenwood Elves are having a tough time finding food. This guy observed that the only thing that grew was fungus, so he engineered a kind of sentient fungus the elves could cultivate, harvest, and eat, and he called them Thalids. Naturally, the Thalids revolted against the elves, wiped them out, and more or less took over the entire island. We will unfortunately be revisiting this. Drudge Reavers is a take on Drudge Skeletons from Alpha. In fact, most of these cards riff on cards from Alpha. Out of 281 cards in Time Spiral, 56 of them can trace their lineage back to Alpha. And not just the iconic Alpha cards either. Oh, no. This is a set by and for hardcore nerds. In fact, Drudge Skeletons might be one of the more iconic Alpha cards Time Spiral references, which does not bode well. Next up is Careful Consideration, which is actually two things. Sure, it's a reference to Careful Study, but it's also part of a cycle of uncommon instants that pay you off for casting them during your main phase. The other members of this cycle are Haunting Hymn, an allusion to Hymn to Torok, Sulphurous Blast, an allusion to Steam Blast, Might of Old Crozia, an allusion to Giant Growth, and Return to Dust, which I always thought alluded to Dust, but actually references Altar's Light. By the way, the sword in this art belongs to Jacques Levert and can also be seen on Corrosion Grip, which is just split-second naturalize. Sangrophage, wow. Sangrophage is a play on Carnophage, and while Carnophage saw plenty of tournament play, Sangrophage saw none. Wasn't even playable in draft. I wonder if they tested it as a 4/4. Look, I know they added 1 to every stat, but they also doubled every stat, except power and toughness. A 4/4 for 2 could have been pretty cool, and would have felt a lot like a card that saw a lot of play alongside Carnophage. There's so much going on in this set that it's easy to forget that Time Spiral also brought back slivers. This is Pulmonic Sliver, which is based on Avenging Angel. Now, Avenging Angel is not a very good card, even back in 1998, but it is sick. I mean, how the hell do you even kill it? Here's Wheel of Fate, which is Wheel of Fortune with Suspend. Time Spiral has literally a bajillion keyword mechanics, most of which are old, and then also 2 new ones. Suspend is one of the new ones, and if it looks familiar to you, that's probably because they recently fixed it, called it Impending, and slapped it on a cycle of Mythic Rares in Duskmourn. Wheel of Fate is part of a cycle of rares with Suspend and no mana value that all do some old card when they come off Suspend. There's Lotus Bloom in Wheel of Fate, but there's also Hypergenesis, which is Eureka, Restore Balance, which is Balance, Ancestral Vision, which is Ancestral Recall, and Living End, which is Living Death. Whether or not it's smart to do some of these cards with the Suspend treatment is up for debate, but what is unambiguously going for them is that they are evocative and cool and all kind of tell their own story. Some of those stories involve their competitive pedigree, some of them involve figuring out how to make them work, or explaining why they're banned in Modern. But they necessarily all involve some sort of history lesson, and if you're into that, then Time Spiral is very much your thing. Alright, so this is Havenwood Worm. Havenwood is a Dominarian forest on the aforementioned continent of Sarpedia that is only referenced in Fallen Empires, and even then, only on 5 spells. The green cards all play defensively, and Havenwood Worm kinda does too. We'll stay with Fallen Empires for just a bit as we move towards Salt-Crusted Steppe, one of a 5-card cycle of uncommon lands that functioned as a colorless producing land while also providing the option to store mana on it in the form of storage counters. There's 1 for each allied color pair, and because their settings aren't evocative of anything, there's no need to really cover the rest. They're a callback to another 5-card cycle of lands from, you guessed it, Fallen Empires. Unlike their Time Spiral successors, this cycle doesn't even function as a land till the 3rd turn you have it in play, and after that, you have to wait another 2 turns to even use it again. That is truly terrible. Let's shift gears, and no, look at that, more goddamn Fallen Empires shit. This is a Thalid. They're really fiddly and really dirtily. Watching this ragtag team of Star Fox 64 bosses slowly generate counters like a glacier trudging across the northeast United States 25,000 years ago could potentially be fun for someone, but I don't think that's the case for most people. Nevertheless, they are, again, all over this set. We move on to Vesuvan Shapeshifter, which is like Vesuvan Doppelganger, but with Morph. Unlike Vesuvan Doppelganger, Vesuvan Shapeshifter doesn't give you the option to change what creature it is during your upkeep, but rather gives you the option to turn itself face down again to rebuy the clone ability that way. It worked in conjunction with our next card to lock opponents out of ever untapping ever again. Okay, so Brine Elemental is Water Elemental, but it's also got Morph, because, as you'll see, every fucking card in this set is two things at once. Okay, so once you flip over Brine Elemental, you get Exhaustion. Combine that with Vesuvan Shapeshifter, which lets you morph for 2 mana and rebuy the morph every turn, and you have a one-sided stasis lock. If you're wondering if this came up in tournament play, rest assured that it very much did, thanks to an ancient dark art called Block Constructed. Speaking of Block Constructed, this one is a banger. It's a reference to Mystical Tutor, and it's a total power outlier for the set, especially once you factor in the ability to Teachings for Teachings. In fact, the power of this card's interaction with itself warped the entire Block Constructed format around it, not to mention that it also tutored up our next card. Alright, so this is Teferi in creature form, which hadn't been done since Disruptive Student 10 years prior. You probably know Teferi better as a Planeswalker, which begs the question, why is this thing a creature? Okay, so we gotta go back to the story behind Invasion. As Dominaria gets invaded by Phyrexia, Teferi decides he wants nothing to do with any of this, and he phases parts of Zhalfir and Shiv out completely. From Alpha up to Scourge, every Magic set took place on the plane of Dominaria, with very few exceptions. That's 10 years worth of stuff happening, and it turns out all this stuff fucked up Dominaria a lot. So 300 years after the events of Apocalypse, Teferi returns to Dominaria to find time rifts all over the plane. What are time rifts? Unclear. They're kind of like black holes, I suppose, and they're hungry. They demand Planeswalker sparks, and so Teferi gives his up in order for Shiv to phase back in safely. This is part of a larger narrative arc in Magic known as the Mending, which is essentially a recalibration of the scope of Planeswalkers' powers. Before the Mending, Planeswalkers were effectively immortal deities, which is why they were never depicted on cards till the block right after Time Spiral, Lorwyn. Teferi's text box is 1 part Flash, 1 part City of Solitude, both from Mirage Block, which takes place in Teferi's homeland of Zhalfir. Next up, Greenseeker. Greenseeker's part of a 5-card cycle of commons that all cast a card from Magic's past. This one casts Lay of the Land. We couldn't stay away from Fallen Empire's nonsense for too long. So this thing is basically just Sea Spirit with Suspend, but it's also a Homarid, which is a Dominarian shellfish. It'll fuck you up for sure, but with a little melted butter and a lightly toasted bun, it is probably delicious. Ooh, Fallen Ideal. This is part of a 5-card cycle of enchantments that come back to your hand when they die. This one turns the creature into Fallen Angel, and its art even references the classic Fallen Angel art, that little horn tiara thing. Okay, Corpulent Corpse. This is part of another 5-card cycle, and this one really defined the limited experience of Time Spiral since they were all common and they were all pretty good. This is just Gluttonous Zombie with Suspend. Ixidron. You know, it's really amazing. Every single one of these damn cards is its own rabbit hole to get lost in. Okay, deep breath. There's this guy, Ixidor, and he does stuff with morphs. It turns out he also created Akroma, who is also on the time-shifted sheet. It's heavily implied but not explicitly stated that Ixidron is also one of Ixidor's many creations, and just so happens to combo with him really well. You get to turn your morphs face up again and your opponent doesn't. Neat! Truth or Tale is a riff on classic tournament staple Fact or Fiction, but different in a couple meaningful ways. This time around, you make the piles and your opponent chooses where the cards end up. Also, the cards that don't get picked go to the bottom of your library as opposed to your graveyard, which is almost certainly worse. Yeah, Truth or Tale costs 2 mana as opposed to 4, but the nerfs are so intense that it's still not really worth playing. Subterranean Shambler takes inspiration from Subterranean Spirit. If Lotus Bloom is the promise of the premise of Time Spiral, then Subterranean Shambler is the actual Time Spiral experience. They took an obscure card and fixed it, and the team was not shy about using whatever past mechanic was necessary to make it work. With Subterranean Shambler, they changed the Spirit's activated ability to a triggered one that happens whenever it enters or leaves play, and then they gave it Echo to ensure that you could strategically have the thing leave play by not paying the Echo if you wanted. By the way, I don't really play Commander, but do people know about this card? Feels like Repeatable Tremor could be pretty good in certain spots. Oh, Goblin Skycutter. It's just a goblin that casts Vertigo. Most old heads see this card as an homage to Earthbind, but its activated ability functions much more closely to Vertigo. Even Goblin Skycutter's art looks more derivative of Vertigo. Just take my word for it. Of all the cards in Time Spiral, Tysus is far and away the most annoying one to try and pronounce when you're a teenager. In the lore, Tysus is Dominarian radiation poisoning from prolonged exposure to Power Stones, which are an ancient power source of the plane. As far as the game text goes, it's a mono-black suspend version of Agonizing Demise with Kicker. Ignite Memories. I made a video about this card once. Kind of. Ignite Memories is a storm version of the activated ability of Planeswalker's Fury, and that is perhaps the least interesting thing about the history of this card. You should definitely finish watching this, but if you find yourself looking for more Ignite Memories content after you're done, a link to the video I made 6 years ago is in the description for you. You could classify Sprite Noble as foreshadowing, since the next block after this is Lorwyn, which will have fairies out the ass. But the truth is, this is just a fixed version of a card from Homelands that made no sense as a green card, or any card for that matter. Speaking of foreshadowing, I'm pretty sure this is just supposed to be half a Chatter of the Squirrel at instant speed, but it could also allude to this piece of shit that ruined many a Time Spiral block draft. If this card seems unbeatable, that's because it is. Yo. Okay. This is Stuffy Doll, aka Stuffs McDoll, aka the No-Eyed Bandit, aka the Goat. This is one of my favorite cards. It's not very good, but it was cool. Cards didn't really play like this back then. In 2006, Indestructible was still pretty novel, and you really weren't used to seeing it on cards that weren't 11/11s for 11 mana. The doll depicted on the art is very distinct, and the reason for that is because it's depicted on a bunch of other iconic cards from the 90s, illustrated by Richard Thomas. Gauntlet of Might's really weird. Is it meant to be a standalone card that leans into what Red wants to do? Was it a cycle meant to be expanded upon in subsequent sets? I have no clue. I see Gauntlet of Power as more or less a correction of Gauntlet of Might. Like Pulmonic Sliver, Plague Sliver turns all slivers into a rare from Magic's past. This one turns all slivers into Juzum Djinn, which is pretty clever. It's a sliver hoser that's also a sliver, and ostensibly powerful in its own right. The unfortunate reality of the situation is that Juzum Djinn was likely never good, not even in 1994, but it's iconic enough that as a designer you're incentivized to attempt to recapture the secret sauce that Juzum brings to the table. Also, this thing has moves that Juzum couldn't even dream of. It's one of the rare cards in this set that's appealing even if you're not in on the joke. Okay. This card is very near and dear to my heart. My first ever Grand Prix was Grand Prix Massachusetts, in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, less than a month after I turned 18. It was really, really sweet. The format was limited two-headed giant, made up of Time Spiral and Planar Chaos. My teammate and I opened a pretty shitty pool where our only 3 playable white cards were Aven Riftwatcher, Mangara of Corondor, and Magus of the Disc. So we splashed white for them and got rocked. Tale as old as time. The venue, which was a Best Western but is now a water park, was situated on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere, so I just ambled around the site the rest of the day. The memory that sticks with me the most is watching some locals rotisserie draft a cube with Japanese pros before cube was even a thing. The vibes were immaculate. And remember, This is before vibes were a thing too. I finally headed back to my room at like 11, and right there in the lobby of the hotel was a bunch of people I came with trying to fire a money draft. So we started money drafting in the lobby. I was still on my first pick when a random dude walked up to our table and asked, "Are you guys cool?" Not wanting to be rude, I replied yes, and he dropped his Jansport bag next to me and walked out without another word. When he dropped that bag, we all heard the distinct clanging of beer bottles. The guy had left us a baker's dozen cold Labatt's. The next day I washed out of the JSS qualifier, but as far as my relationship with Magic goes, I was fully hooked. Anyway, you know what's a really sweet card in Two-Headed Giant? Squall Line. As long as you have more life than your opponents when you cast it, you're more likely than not winning the game, because even though you share life totals with your teammate, Squall Line still deals damage to both of you. Or at least that's how it worked in 2007. This card is the love child of Fault Line and Hurricane. But honestly, who the fuck cares? That Grand Prix, that dude with the backpack of beers, witnessing that Japanese guy giggling unrestrained over taking Mana Vault and Upheaval on the wheel, that shit, not whatever the origin of fucking Squall Line is what compelled me to do Wizard Squares on YouTube. I'll be honest, I don't really get what the point of competitive Magic is anymore. TOs don't know how to fire RCQs with the correct number of rounds because judges aren't required and the companion app fucking blows. They can't balance cards for shit because fucking sets have to come out right on top of each other for some reason, so every major tournament features some obvious deck that's 40% of the field. At this point, competitive Magic is nothing more than a marketing expense. One that, from a pure business perspective, would almost certainly make more sense to be directed towards Commander. But then I think about that Grand Prix, and I see Fire Shoes retweet every happy RCQ winner, and I just mentally shut the fuck up and appreciate what I've got. I was 18 then, and I'm 36 now, meaning that I've lived a whole other lifetime since that weekend in Fitchburg. The door on this shit is closing. As tempting as it is to complain about Underworld Breach or Vivi or whatever the shit happens to be, I've at least thankfully taken enough away from all of this to know that I really need to enjoy this time. Because once they start doing Dual Commander Pro Tours, which is any day now, I am probably done. We move now to Norin the Wary, which is not a creature in the traditional sense because it doesn't attack or block, or die to removal, or really do much of anything but be a game object in play. It's a weird card, and the only times I've ever seen it appeal to anyone was because they misread its text box. Norin the Wary, the character, mostly shows up in flavor text dating all the way back to Alpha, and look, I'm sure there's a ton of bizarre, weirdo combos this thing enables, but if you're looking for a creature that simply functions as a creature, look elsewhere. Dirkwood Baloth is one of the better suspend commons of its cycle. My guess is that it was meant to be a 4/4 as a callback to Dirkwood Boars from Legends, and it got a little stat boost by the playtesters. Firewake Sliver is a clear reference to Fires of Yavimaya, which is itself a multicolored version of Fervor. Flowstone Channeler is a really weird card, but I love it, and the explanation behind its ability is long. Okay, so Wrath is an artificial plane made by Yawgmoth, the guy that made Phyrexia and all that. He made Wrath because his plan all along was to invade his home plane of Dominaria, and to do that, he determined that he could just put a plane on top of Dominaria, whatever that means, and as long as the plane kept growing, it would eventually cause a rift in the time, space, whatever the fuck, that would allow his little Phyrexian nightmares to invade the plane directly. Wrath is made of Flowstone, which is earth that slowly grows over time, that the ruler, or Evankar of Wrath, who gets installed by Yawgmoth himself, can actually manipulate. So ostensibly that means that if you try to fight Volrath on Wrath, he can just have the ground punch you in the face. So yeah, Wrath is a wasteland plane, and only 4 sets take place there. The entirety of Tempest Block and Nemesis. There are a handful of cards that reference Flowstone, and they all boost power and subtract toughness, like this thing. Or this. Or this. Or this. Or this. You get the picture. Anyways, that's why Flowstone Channeler gives +1/-1, because that is what Flowstone does in the game. Next, Serra Avenger's a really cool card. I can't remember a timing restriction ever getting placed on a card before this one, where you couldn't play it until a certain turn, but this one still had a ton of heat on it right when Time Spiral came out. So yeah, it's a Serra Angel, but smaller, and all else being equal, you can play it a turn earlier. When you explain it that way, it doesn't sound very cool, but in 2006, Serra Avenger was badass. Okay, Wormwood Dryad. This is a scaled down version of Wormwood Treefolk, and can I just say, god damn are the old green cards brutal. You can't even fucking read them. Why would they let cards go to print like this? Smallpox is just a smaller pox, and it rules. You know what's really cool to play alongside Smallpox? Man, Flagstones of Trocaire. I thought this card was the shit. By this point, the Shocklands existed, Boom Bust was in the very next set to combo with it. Flagstones of Trocaire was just too cool for school, man. The card itself doesn't really function like anything that came before it, it just references Trocaire, which was a Sarpadian city that, you guessed it, ate shit during the events of Fallen Empires. Alright. Which one of you love Fallen fucking Empires so much? You're not in trouble, just, you know, fucking tell me. You're gonna have a tough time finding a lame sliver in this whole block. In a sliver deck, Telekinetic Sliver is the equivalent of opposition with the important caveat that summoning sick creatures can't use the ability. Which is more than fair because opposition's fucked up. Cyclopean Giant. Dude, okay. This is a weird card with a weird ability made extra weird by being a common, which is typically not where you find a text box this overwrought and specific and pointless. First, Cyclopean Mummy. It's a 2/1 for 2, and when it dies, it gets exiled. So Cyclopean Giant is just like a giant one of those. But that doesn't explain the weird shit about swamps, so here's Cyclopean Tomb. The alpha version wasn't printed with a mana cost, but this thing costs 4, and since nothing on this text box makes a lick of sense, here's the Oracle wording, which kind of makes sense until you get to the back half of the second paragraph, which as it turns out is all one sentence. Lest you think the designers of this set were not passionate about what they were doing, ask yourself, why else would you work this hard to evoke Cyclopean Tomb 13 years after it was printed? You see, these fine people don't hate you. They actually love you and are excited for you to play with their set. They're just expressing that love in a way that can be hard to understand sometimes and even frustrating to hear on occasion. But they do love you. But they also look back on the set with eyes wide open. VP of Magic Design Aaron Forsyth was a guest on Mark Rosewater's Drive to Work podcast in 2021. And when he was asked about what stood out in his memory when designing Time Spiral, he recalled Stormcloud Djinn. In the process admitting what a shit show all this was in hindsight. Forsyth's not looking back on Time Spiral with rose-colored glasses, he absolutely sees it for what it is, and I appreciate that. We move now to Ashcoat Bear. I'm pretty sure it's only called Ashcoat because it has Flash, and is a grizzly bear, and Flash has the word ash in it. The very next card is Aspect of Mongoose, which is part of that Rancor-like cycle of uncommon auras and is also a reference to Blurred Mongoose. Gitu Fire Breathing is an amalgam of Gitu Fire and Fire Breathing. Some of these are more straightforward than others. Stonewood Invocation. Now this one is a banger. It's a callback to Stonewood Invoker, and the split second plus Shroud Rider ensures that the creature you just pumped won't get picked off by a random terror, or whatever. Of all the cards in the set, Stonewood Invocation might be the sickest, which is saying something. Yes, the lows in Time Spiral are low, but the highs are high too. Like Vesuva. If you've ever played against Modern Amulet Titan in one of its myriad forms, you're familiar with Vesuva. Like Vesuvan Doppelganger, Vesuva clones a land when it enters, but unlike Vesuvan Doppelganger, Vesuva is locked in once it enters, making it more like Clone, but for lands. The word spinneret is a clear enough allusion to spiders, and what do spiders do in Magic? They block flyers. Pull from Eternity is like an inverse cremate minus the cantrip, and it had some utility as a way to deal with a suspended thing. I played with Mindstab Thrall a lot as a kid, and I didn't realize this thing was derived from Mindstab Thrall till just now. In hindsight, this is all fairly obvious, and I am quite embarrassed. Let's keep going. Detainment Spell is half Stupefying Touch, half Cage of Hands. Really weird card. The Psychotic episode is just coercion with madness, but also you get to see their top card too, because why the fuck not? Deathspore Thallid is like the rest of the Thallids, but it gives the ensuing Saprolings an ability that is decidedly black, which, if you've already made up your mind that Thallids are a thing you're gonna do, this is a pretty cool execution. Plus, Thallids are obviously not green, they're Golgari, which is its own identity. And Deathspore Thallid goes a decent way towards realizing that identity, which they eventually will with Slimefoot. And yes, I looked it up. In the lore, that thing is a Thallid, and not giving it the Thallid creature type is cowardice. And yes, I know I complained about Fallen Empire's overwhelming influence in the set just a few minutes ago, but this is an apples and oranges situation. If you're gonna have a major character that's a Thallid, then just make it a damn Thallid. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. I'm talking hats on hats on hats. This feels more like a nuts and bolts card geared towards enabling the random madness cards than an expression of nostalgia or childlike wonder or whatever. This could be a lot of things too. Helm of Awakening, Stone Calendar, could be almost anything. Moonlace, oh boy. For some fucking reason, early Magic sets always seem to have a handful of cards that let you change the colors of a thing. The classic example is Sleight of Mind, but Moonlace gets its name from a cycle of shitters from Alpha, and it depicts the null moon in its art. Seriously, old Magic sets were loaded with this nonsense till probably Tempest, and thank God, because the version of Magic where these are seated in packs as rares is horrible. This is just Smother with Flashback. And as far as the best common in Time Spiral goes, it's either this thing or it's this. For my money, this is actually the best common in the set. Turns out, an air elemental with haste that costs effectively 0 mana is really difficult to deal with. Hello, Buyback Fork. This card sucks. Undying Rage is just Maniacal Rage, but it comes back, hence the Undying. As far as ways to recreate pacifism in a modern era set go, giving it Muzzle plus Shadow is certainly a clever way to do it. What I'm not so sure of is why this thing has Flash, but it plays well enough, so we'll take it. Okay, Kaervek the Merciless. My primary experience with this card is in my friend Zach's Type 4 stack, and look, at this point, if you don't know what Type 4 is, just Google it, okay? We're getting kind of long in the tooth here, and I honestly don't know how many more detours I can justify. Anyways, Kaervek. In the lore, he's the primary antagonist for all the sets that take place on Jamuura: Mirage, Visions, and Prophecy. His text box is derived from his Purge. These days, I guess he's chilling on Thunder Junction, which is really strange, but whatever. Evil Eye of Urborg alludes to Evil Eye of Orms Gore from Legends, and they both come with the same rider. If it's not an eyeball, you can't attack with it. The original Evil Eye has pseudo-evasion that was less impactful in a set like Legends with a billion fucking walls in it, but by this point walls were mostly phased out, so they gave it the Urborg Panther ability. Kind of. In practice, Evil Eye of Urborg still effectively has evasion since you don't really want to block it, but if you're at 5 life or whatever, you still have the option. Two-Headed Sliver, which gives every sliver an ability that is now referred to as Menace, does not trace its lineage to Two-Headed Giant of 4Es, but rather Two-Headed Dragon. But just in case you were worried that there was no card that referenced Two-Headed Giant of 4Es in all of Time Spiral, Here's Pharesian Interceptor, which is basically a 4-mana fog that just kind of chills on the battlefield till it's dealt with, but that explanation also makes the card sound much better than it actually is. Speaking of card sounds, how the fuck do you pronounce Fories? The last 2 paragraphs took longer to record than the rest of this script combined. Okay. Amru was where all the Kithkin of Dominaria lived. Kithkin and Amru were only ever referenced on one card, Amru Kithkin, because this is before Lorwyn, so Kithkin aren't really a thing yet. Amru Seekers is more or less a regular old Kithkin with Seeker preloaded onto it, while Amru Scout is Remosian Lieutenant with flip-flop power and toughness and some different types. Cards like Premature Burial always read much better than they play out. This thing is just black Remove Soul that lets opposing enters the battlefield abilities happen. Kinda sucks. Walk the Aeons is another card that traces its lineage back to Alpha, but this one's not such a grating deep cut. Time Walk's a card folks actually enjoy playing with. And look it, the 3 skeletons from the original Time Walk art are trying to move a pendulum. That's cute. More Alpha stuff. Sedge Sliver is Sedge Troll, but a sliver. Demonic Collusion is Demonic Tutor. I've been playing Magic for 25 years, and going through this whole exercise, I'm still seeing cards from the 90s that I've never seen before. Like Clergy of the Holy Nimbus, which inspired its knightly counterpart. That's pretty cool. Opaline Sliver is Reparation Sliver. It's even the same mana cost. Coal Stoker is half Coal Golem, half Priest of Gix. Snapback is Snap, but instead of being free, it's... well, it's still free. It's just free in a different way. You know, I gotta give him credit. If you're gonna reference cards with mechanics that never should have seen print to begin with, this is a pretty clever way to do it. Ophidian Eye gets its name from Ophidian, but it's just an instant speed curiosity. Chromatic Star is just a better Chromatic Sphere, and like Coal Stoker, it plays well with the Storm cards strewn about the set. Paradise Plume plays like Soul Grail, but flavor-wise, it's a callback to Birds of Paradise. I believe the life gain clause is inspired by this cycle of artifacts from Darksteel, a clause that persists to this day on cards like Diamond Mare. Harmonic Sliver is Mandatory Aura Shard Sliver. Draw New is 2 cards. First, Lich. As it pertains to Draw New is its own contained Lich, so every time it takes damage, you sacrifice permanents. It's also a repeatable recoup for some reason. Gustcloak Cavalier is a mashup of Alaborn Cavalier and Gustcloak Sentinel. Also, let's just throw flanking on there, because why the fuck not? Greater Gargadon. Now this thing rules. It draws inspiration from Lesser Gargadon, but Greater Gargadon is very much its own thing, taking advantage of Suspend's, shall we say, unique design space to serve beatdowns way ahead of schedule. Sage of Epicure is just grounded Sage Owl, and it plays a niche role in gimmick decks from time to time. Oh, Gemstone Caverns. This card is sweet. The name alludes to Gemstone Mine, and in certain instances, it can get a counter and also tap for one of any of the 5 colors. That's where the similarities end. So before the World Champion got to design their own card, there was a yearly event simply called the Magic Invitational. 16 of the most popular players that year would compete in a tournament full of casual formats for the right to have their likeness and design printed on a card. It's where cards like Dark Confidant and Snapcaster Mage came from. In 2005, Terry So won the Invitational, and as such, got his likeness printed on a card. However, the 2005 Invitational was unique. Each player's submission was posted online, and the public got to vote for their favorite design, which turned out to be Tsuyoshi Fujita's Unlucky Man's Paradise. Obviously, this design didn't see print as written. It got the legendary super type as well as the exiled card from hand in the event of a luck counter. But the card is really cool all the same, and certainly much better balanced with the Exile a Card rider. Fury Sliver gets its name from Psychotic Fury, which is weird because Fury Sliver is monocolored. Oh well. Pitkeeper's Enter's trigger comes directly from Oversold Cemetery. Plunder is pillage, but with suspend. Get it? Pillage and plunder. Strength in Numbers is a green take on Mob Mentality from Visions. Okay. Counterspell was in every core set through 7th edition. That stopped in 8th edition, supplanted by Mana Leak, but Mana Leak proved too powerful as well. So the Time Spiral team took it upon themselves to recalibrate the power level of what the game's standard legal counter magic spell should look like, by designing a counterspell that all other counter magic to come after it would be oriented around. And this is what we got. It's hard to complain too much about Cancel since Counterspell and Mana Leak are busted. And look, the same thing's going on in these arts. That's pretty cool. Joyrus Time Bug draws inspiration from Joyrus Toolbox, only the Time Bug actually has some fringe applications while the Toolbox doesn't. Oh look, they made Matenda Herder Sliver. The word Penumbra showed up 3 times before this card, all contained in a vertical cycle from Apocalypse. I always assumed Penumbra was some proprietary Magic the Gathering word, but it's not. A Penumbra is a half shadow cast when a light source is only partially covered. For example, during a solar eclipse. So the reason the tokens these things make are black is because they are shadows. Penumbra Spider is just Giant Spider with the Penumbra ability. I don't know about you, but I am learning a lot. Partic Dragon is a slightly smaller Shivan Dragon with a suspend ability that you should never ever use. This thing showed up in the Time Spiral novel for about half a page and then was never heard from again because it sucks and everyone hates it. Zealot Ilvek takes its triggered ability from Feral Zealot, but since it has Shadow, they chilled out on the damage a bit. Time Spiral's got a good amount of old creatures they just added Shadow to and recalibrated a bit. Prismatic Lens is just cheaper Mana Prism. Primal Force Mage is really weird. It doesn't even work unless your next creature has haste, which green doesn't do that often. In fairness, green would get some cool hasters in this very block, but yeah. It gets its name from Tribal Force Mage, and the fixed version, which would come 6 years later, retained the Force Mage title. Flamecore Elemental has the same exact stats as Fire Elemental, but it's a mana cheaper and has Echo. Man, they really should have let Melissa Benson cook more often. Okay. Now, before Teferi phased out entire continents on purpose, he did so on accident, attracting 3 Jamuran Sinishers who had been steadily gaining power and influence in the region over the last couple hundred years. Jolrael, the aforementioned Kaervek, and of course Mangara. The 3 agreed to keep an eye on the area, and Mangara, a natural diplomat, fostered peace in the region. Peace wasn't technically part of the deal, so Kaervek manipulated Jolrael into teaming up against Mangara and imprisoned him in Amber, like from Jurassic Park. This sparked the Mirage War, which is the main storyline across Mirage and Visions. Blah blah blah, more stuff happens, Mangara is eventually freed and traps Kaervek in the Amber, and the Mirage War ends. Fast forward to Time Spiral. I read the Time Spiral novel, and then I read the Planar Chaos novel, and then I read the Future Sight novel. Do I recommend doing this? No, I do not. Do any of these books call out Mangara, Jolrael, or Kaervek by name? No, they do not. It appears that the 4 central figures of the Mirage War are in this set because someone wanted them to be. Which is fine! Oh, and I think Mangara's text box is supposed to approximate the gameplay of Amber Prison, but who knows. Academy Ruins is a callback to Tolarian Academy, both the card and the setting and the lore. Both cards mess with artifacts, although Academy Ruins, you know, it's slightly less broken than its counterpart. Tolarian Academy facilitated turn 1 wins in Standard, while Academy Ruins' most common application is Recurring Mindslaver. I suppose both cards just so happen to rob their opponent of their turns. It also just so happens to be a blue Volrath Stronghold. 13 years later, another card was added to this cycle. Sadly, Academy Ruins is a rarity for this set. A simple design that references an older card that was actually iconic, as opposed to endless obscure 1995 callbacks for no one. Speak of the devil. Okay, back to Sarpedia. So Fallen Empires. On Sarpedia exist 5 cultures that more or less coexist harmoniously. The black-aligned Order of the Ebon Hand, the green-aligned Havenwood Elves, the red-aligned Dwarves, the blue-aligned Vodalian Merfolk, and finally, the white-aligned Icatian Humans. As you may have guessed, Endrik Saar belongs to the Order of the Ebon Hand. In the entrepreneurial spirit of responding to the needs of the free market, in this case the Order's insatiable need for living sacrifices, Endrik Saar invented thralls, shambling, barely humanoid creatures that looked gross and did what they were told. Eventually they overtook the Order and everything else on Sarpedia, which is reflected in the second paragraph of Endrik Saar's text box. Benelrish Cavalry is just Glory Seeker with flanking, because Weatherlight takes place in Benalia, and a lot of the cards in Mirage Block have flanking. Yep, we're going with that. Next card, please. Davenant Healer? I don't really know if that's how you're supposed to pronounce that, but whatever. It's just a cross between Davenant Archer and Samite Healer. Every set used to have at least one of these 2 cards in common, but they stopped doing that around Zendikar because they grind games down to a halt, which is something Magic's game engine already does by accident. This is another mash of 2 cards, Killer Bees and Unyaro Beasting. This, I think, is the callback done right. The card plays simply enough, and if you know the predecessors, then you get the joke right away, and if you don't, it's easily explained. There's a reason Morrow always brings this one up when explaining Time Spiral to someone. Word of Seizing is split-second threaten, and here's another thing I didn't know before working on this. From Mirage through Unglued, every set had at least one card that featured flavor text comprised entirely of one 4-letter word. Word of Seizing's flavor is a callback to that. Urza's Factory creates assembly workers. If you think that's weirdly specific, you'd be right. It's a callback to Mishra's Factory. Since both creatures are assembly workers, Mishra's Factory can actually pump the tokens from Urza's Factory. This little synergy is called out in the flavor text. While we're here, we might as well call out literal assembly worker, which also works with these other things. These synergies never came up, but they sure are there. Another member of the Rancor cycle, Fool's Demise is just False Demise with the Rancor ability stapled on. There are a cycle of uncommon totems in Time Spiral that cost 3 to cast, make mana, and can turn into a creature from Magic's past. Thunder Totem becomes a Thunder Spirit. Chronotog Totem becomes a Chronotog. Phyrexian Totem becomes a Phyrexian Negator. Pharesian Totem becomes a 2-headed Giant of Fories. And Weatherseed Totem becomes Weatherseed Treefolk. This cycle is cool. Chronotog and 2-headed Giant of Fories are maybe too weird or bad or whatever, but on balance, I think the cycle works. Plated Pegasus is a mashup of Armored Pegasus and Benevolent Unicorn. They also gave it Flash because, I don't know. They probably thought Flash would play well with its static ability. Maybe it does. Again, I don't know. I've drafted this set more than I've drafted most sets, and I've never cast this card once. Orcish Cannonade is Orcish Cannoneer's activated ability, but as a cantrip instant. Shadow Sliver pulls no punches. It's Soltari Foot Soldier Sliver. All slivers gain Shadow, easy peasy. Think Twice is just inspiration with extra steps. To this day, it is a calling card for anyone who enjoys drawing cards so much that they make it their entire personality. It's modest, it's flexible, and playing it makes you feel smart. Look, Time Spiral mostly fails on its premise, which is that we're going to reference classics and make them into something contemporary that you can enjoy right now. Most of the shit we've gone over so far has been the product of the set's designers giddily distracting themselves with deeper and deeper cuts from the game's most justifiably underappreciated years. Cards like Think Twice, honestly anything that doesn't reference fallen fucking empires, are a really nice break. Legends goes down as an all-timer, but the truth about Legends is that the vast majority of the cards are shit. Case in point, the inspiration for Gorgon Recluse, Infernal Medusa. Gorgon Recluse is arguably worse, thanks to its non-black rider, so they gave it Madness. Okay. Sudden Spoiling, on the other hand, is one of the better limited cards in the entire set, and it gets its functionality from Sorceress Queen. For the most part, I think Split Second is cool. The Time Spiral team wisely avoided doing too much of it, restricting it to only 2 cards per color and keeping it out of common entirely. Sudden Spoiling is perhaps the upper limit of how intense you're supposed to make a Split Second card, but is okay in small doses and is generally not the kind of thing you want to load up a deck with. Pentarch Ward is Flickering Ward, but 10,000 times worse. Herdnar is another callback to obscurity. This time 2 green commons from Apocalypse. Also, something fucked up that I didn't realize till right now. Why does Gladenar cost 6 while Bognar costs 5? Keep in mind, this is back when Literal Counterspell and Literal Brainstorm and Literal Fact or Fiction were all legal in Standard. Never mind nonsense like Repulse and Exclude that openly clowned on creatures like this anyway. Did someone trying to go after blue players with 6 mana creatures really need to pay extra to do so? Choices like that honestly make me feel like game design wasn't even a thing until the 2010s and that everything else before them was just kinda done at random. Seriously, why else would Gladenar cost more? Celestial Crusader is Crusade on a creature. Assassinate is a one-shot of Royal Assassin's activated ability and is pretty cool, because even though it's not very good, Assassinate is a card that mostly works, and Royal Assassin is a card that players actually give a shit about. See, this is not that hard. Even in 2006, there were so many old Magic cards that people liked. You didn't need to redesign fucking Feral's Zealot. Duskrider Peregrine is a bigger version of Duskrider Falcon that also has Suspend. If I'm pronouncing Peregrine wrong, just know that I got this pronunciation from a 1996 episode of Kratz Creatures, so blame them. Spiketail Drakeling fills in the gap of a vertical cycle of creatures from Prophecy. Paradox Haze wasn't inspired by an old card, but rather a submission in Magic's second You Make the Card contest, held in 2003. The actual winner of that contest was Crucible of Worlds, but R&D continued to mine submissions for designs. Mechanic H eventually came to be Paradox Haze. I love this inclusion. Not because Paradox Haze is cool. I mean, it is cool, but putting a card like Paradox Haze in this set signals that Magic's history in the eyes of the designers is not just confined to cards that were printed. This signals that there is more to Magic than the game pieces. I appreciate that sentiment a lot. Thelanite Hermit is Deranged Hermit, but with Morph instead of Echo. Not a strict upgrade since a lot of Deranged Hermit's value comes from finding ways to circumvent its mana cost, but this is cool too. Yavimaya Dryad is a weird one, and its origins are kind of open for debate. It's definitely part Rushwood Dryad, that is for sure. I think the other half is supposed to be Yavimaya Granger, but it's been obviously tweaked a bit. You can give the forest to an opponent, if you so choose, and now you have an unblockable 2/1. Finally, Gorilla Pack has a home. Dark Withering is Dark Banishing, but it costs double the mana, offers no regenerate protection, and has Madness. Take it from me, when magicians tell you that you should always draft removal high, they are not talking about Dark Withering. Aetherweb is a play on web, but contemporized a bit. It has flash, and also allows the enchanted creature to tangle with Shadow Duders as well, making it part web, part Wall of Diffusion ability, I guess? Firemaw Kavu is a really interesting take on Flametongue Kavu. In the interest of not having Firemaw Kavu define the terms of engagement of standard like its predecessor did, Firemaw Kavu is not really pointed for constructed play. That is the nicest way to say it. Drifter Ildal is Shadow Spindrift Drake, the latter of which I didn't even know existed until I tracked the entirety of the top 8 draft for Pro Tour Chicago in 1998. But that is a story for another time. Pendelhaven Elder is Pendelhaven on a stick. Mana Skimmer is a fixed mana leech. Magus of the Mirror. This is one of a cycle of 5 rare creatures that all reference old artifacts that they share an activated ability with. So, Magus of the Mirror is Mirror Universe. Magus of the Scroll is Cursed Scroll. Magus of the Candelabra is Candelabra of Taunters. Magus of the Disc is Nevinyrral's Disc. And finally, Magus of the Jar is Memory Jar. Trader's Clutch is a weird one. It's kind of Breach, kind of Shadow Rift, has flashback, whatever. The card's not very good. Fathom Seer, on the other hand, is busted. It's a morph, and the way these things go is that morphs usually do one of 2 things when you morph them. They turn into a bigger thing, or they do a thing. Fathom Seer does a thing. It's Gush, but on a morph. Keep in mind, this set came out when combat damage went on the stack. So, an opponent could attack into your morph with their 2/2 while you're tapped out, only to have you block, put 2 damage on the stack, and morph your Fathom Seer so their creature dies and yours doesn't. I'm glad combat damage doesn't go on the stack anymore, but boy did it make for a lot of fun stuff. Nightshade Assassin has Necrotal's stats and mana cost, but it plays closer to Nightshade Seer, hence the name. As a kid, I thought you were supposed to pick this over Aaron Ephemeron in drafts. You're not. Watcher Sliver is Castle Sliver, which makes Castle Raptors Castle Bird, which... You get a design as jaw-dropping as Castle. How do you not double dip, am I right? Bogarden Rager. I mean, it's just Fists of the Anvil on a guy. I don't really get this one. Urborg Siphon Mage references not only a card from Legends, but a whole slew of cards from Masks block. Okay, time for me to be a bit vulnerable here, if you'll indulge me. When I first saw this thing, my 17-year-old brain, which, by the way, not fully formed yet, I was so happy. I thought, hell yeah, Blastoderm's back on the menu. Blastoderm was not on the menu. Even when they literally reprinted it in white in the very next set, it was not on the menu. It was perhaps never on the menu to begin with. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest. They power crept Untamed Wilds? In this economy? To be fair, the subprime mortgage crisis hadn't hit yet, but I still love the idea of someone in 2006 getting outraged that they dared to power creep a dog water card from Legends. Here's another thing I didn't know until doing this. Coral Trickster's flavor text is an acrostic that spells out twiddle, which is what Coral Trickster does when you morph it. Its other half is Coral Merfolk. Even though Volcanic Awakening is just Stone Rain with Storm and double the mana cost, it's a callback to Volcanic Eruption, which is one of the funniest cards ever. Apparently unsatisfied with Time Walk and Ancestral Recall, someone determined that blue also needed a Wrath of God and a one-sided Armageddon stapled together. Alpha really is the sickest set. Grapeshot is a reference to Grapeshot Catapult, both in design and flavor. I personally dislike Storm a lot, and even though this card is quite modest when compared to like Tendrils of Agony, it still sucks, facilitating solitaire nonsense in Modern and facilitating nothing in Pauper because it's banned. Divine Congregation is the cowards congregate. Just let people gain life, man. Who cares? Nether Trader's a take on Nether Shadow, but with Shadow, even though it doesn't have Shadow in the name because the one with Shadow in the name doesn't have Shadow. Whatever. Nether Trader's also the beneficiary of some updated templating so that the order of your graveyard doesn't matter. Quilled Sliver is Crossbow Infantry Sliver. Again, they don't do onboard tricksy cards like this anymore. Draining Well had a ton of heat on it when the set dropped, partly due to the card it references, Mana Drain. It's a cool concept. Instead of sucking their resources into your mana pool, you make a creature out of them. Draining Well coupled with Mystic Snake off the time-shifted sheep suddenly provided standard decks with a lot of creatures that doubled as counterspells. If you were committed to making the mana work, then you could combine these two cards with another Time Spiral classic, Momentary Blink, which references Flicker in gameplay and Blinking Spirit in name. And I guess gameplay too, to an extent. Momentary Blink is such a simple, cool design that it spawned new slang within Magic's community. When you exile a creature only to return it to play right away, you're blinking it. I know I've been saying this about a lot of cards in this set, but Voidmage Husher is weird. It's half a Stifle, you can rebuy it, and it's also a creature. Okay. I always thought Trickbind was also a take on Stifle, but it's actually Interdict, only instead of the cantrip, you get Split Second. Weathered Bodyguards is Veteran Bodyguard, but with Morph. I know the old art gets romanticized a lot, and I'm certainly guilty of that, but then there's this. This is some of the most low-effort art on a card I've ever seen, and he even used his own mountain as the background for it. Jesus. Okay, Mishra Artificer Prodigy. Another legend that does not show up in the novel at all. Before the Brothers' War, he wasn't referenced on very many cards, but he is an artificer, so he does stuff with artifacts. It's a bizarre card. I'll give it a pass for not working in Commander at all, because Commander didn't really exist in 2006. Bewilder is a callback to Dizzy Spell, which is unique for Time Spiral because the set seems to pride itself on how far back it's willing to dig in Magic's back catalog, and Dizzy Spell is from the block right before it. As far as I can tell, Scarwood Treefolk is just Ironroot Treefolk that costs one less mana and enters tapped. And you know what? That's fine. You gotta fill out a set like this somehow. Cloud Chaser Kestrel is a mashup of Aurora Griffin and Cloud Chaser Eagle. Barb Shocker is a bigger shocker, but it still sucked, so they gave it Trample and Haste. This thing would be pretty cool nowadays alongside any of the cards that stop your opponent from drawing cards. Gaze of Justice alludes to a card from Fallen Empires. Fledgling Mawcore is just a little baby Mawcore. Glass Asp is just kind of a bigger Naf's Asp. Up until now, I assumed Naf was a person and this was their asp, and the possessive apostrophe got left out. Not the case! Turns out Nafs is an Arabic word that translates to soul or ego. In other words, cooler than glass. I can tell you that most teenage boys in 2006 called this card something similar to Clock Spinning, but not quite the same. I don't think there are a lot of comps to this card. The closest I could find were Parallax Inhibitor and Power Conduit. Back in Tempest block, there are these green creatures called Spikes that moved plus and plus counters around. One of them, originally printed in Stronghold, even made it onto the time-shifted sheet. Spike Tiller can effectively cast another Stronghold card, Verdant Touch. This one references Faceless Butcher, which is also on the time-shifted sheet. In the interest of not being totally messed up, Faceless Devourer only hits shadow creatures. Before he was a planeswalker, Venser was just an artificer living in Urborg. One of the things he made was this take on Metallic Sliver. Blazing Blade Ascari is a callback to Searing Spear and Burning Shield Ascari, a 2/2 for 3 with flanking and an activated ability. Blazing Blade Ascari's activated ability comes from Raging Spirit. Bone Splitter Sliver is Bone Splitter Sliver. Okay, Ith High Arcanist. You may recognize him from his maze, or if you're not old as shit, you may not. Obviously, Ith gets his ability from the maze, but there's some sick shit I did not know about this character, namely, that he was never intended to be a character at all. When it came time to novelize Ice Age, author Jeff Grubb misinterpreted Dark Sphere's flavor text. Not realizing that Lord Ith was Barl's title. So when it came time to novelize the lore behind the Ice Age block, Jeff Grubb wrote Lord Ith as a totally separate person, and that revision is now canon. That rules so hard. Safi Eriksdottir is just angelic renewal on a stick, but the character itself comes from the once iconic flavor text of Lurgleif. These days, the idea of a nostalgia set only 13 years after the game's inception is really funny, given they haven't revisited the idea of a standard legal nostalgia set in the 2 decades since Time Spiral. Part of that, I think, is how they reflect on Time Spiral internally, that the set missed the mark because of its complexity. Yes, Time Spiral is laughably complex, but for me, it's more tempting to imagine a timeline where the set isn't just endless pains to fallen empires. That's the thing. At the end of the day, the nuts and bolts cards mostly play like shit because they were referencing shit. Thrill of the Hunt draws inspiration from Holy Strength, but is a hell of a lot cooler. Flavor-wise, Empty the Warrens refers to Goblin Warrens, but it plays like anything but a Fallen Empires card. As a decent card with Storm, it's been in too many combo decks to name them all, mostly as an option that functions similarly to an off-speed pitch. You want to give yourself hexproof for my Grape Shot? Okay, 44 goblins it is. Spectral Force is the love child of Spectral Bears and Force of Nature. Consider this my official petition to get these two things errated to get stun counters. Throw Exert creatures into the pile if you like. Molder is a callback to Creeping Mold. I wish it was a callback to Molder Slug, but them's the breaks. Stonebrow Corrosion Hero is a bit character in the Odyssey block storyline, and he gets a card here that references another card that is not from that block. Hey. What if Granite Gargoyle was a 3/2 and had Echo? Huh? Is this fun? Do you like this? Huh? Verdant Embrace is an aura that transforms the enchanted creature into a verdant force. Carekeep is really weird, even in this set. It creates a 0/1 with a really specific name. So specific, in fact, that it already exists as a card. I can't think of a card before Carekeep that makes a token of a card that already exists. Very weird. I played the shit out of both Nemesis and Time Spiral and still never realized that Ib Halfheart's activated ability is just Mogollon. His triggered ability is a weird mix of Goblin Grenade and Pyrokinesis, kind of? I don't know. All I know is that he pops up in a handful of Ice Age flavor text, which means he clears the probably too low bar to get his own card in Time Spiral. Much like Jaya Ballard. As a kid, I treasured my foil Deckmaster Incinerates because I thought the art and the flavor text, both lifted from Ice Age, was cool. Unlike Ib Halfheart, Jaya Ballard was actually a character players wanted to see brought to life, and her card definitely does her justice. She's modeled after the Spell Shapers of Masks block, just like Urborg, Siphon Mage, and Flowstone Channeler, but she casts 3 cards: Incinerate, half of Pyroblast, and Inferno, all three of which she has provided flavor text for. Gemhide Sliver is Birds of Paradise Sliver, which is really helpful since slivers are a 5-color endeavor. I really fucking hate cards like this. Big, stupid green cards whose only function is to block and protract games and just be a slog to get through. Whether it's Thragtusk or it's one of the cards that inspired Phantom Worm, these are the rare big creatures that make a game drag out as opposed to ending it quicker. Like there's this dude Eric at my LGS, nice guy, he helped me find honey once in Wegmans, and he's been messing around with this idiot, and it's so fucking annoying because obviously it's just dead to a Doomblade, but if you're just trying to play an honest red deck, then you're more or less dead to this thing, and also it can't attack, so its power is fake, but also its toughness is fake too, and yeah, I'm just tired of this fucking card. I'm playing blue-black next week. I'm sick of this shit. So Limdol is part Bone Knitter, part, I don't know, Animate Dead? Soul Collector? I don't really know what this triggered ability is trying to approximate. You know what? At the end of the day, it's a 4/4 for 7. I think we can move on. Liege of the Pit is obviously a descendant of Lord of the Pit. Remember that Rancor cycle of uncommon auras that all come back when they die? That feels like it's from hours ago, doesn't it? Anyway, here's the white one, which is just Spirit Link. It's pretty rare for a card from this set to see consistent competitive play. For starters, the set is 20 years old, so that pretty much limits it to Modern. By my count, there are 4 cards in this set that see regular Modern play in 2025. Living End, Grapeshot, Lotus Bloom, and Gemstone Caverns. A couple other ones have fallen by the wayside either because of bans or because MH3 invalidated burn. As part of the Nadu Deck Solid Silver Bullet package, Outrider Encore is one of the former, and remains a go-to in Modern when the situation calls for an unbounded way to target one of your own creatures a bunch of times. Just like all the other Encore creatures from Stronghold. Viashino Blade Scout shares a color, creature type, and power and toughness with its predecessor, Viashino Sand Scout, but that's about it. Now, Conflagrate. This is... yeah, I'm saying this a lot, but it's weird. It's a weird one. Its effect is Meteor Shower, but its flashback cost draws inspiration from Firecap Blitz. In a set full of weirdos, Conflagrate really stands out as being very, very wonky. I am no game designer, but I have no idea how you'd arrive at this design unless you were concussed. It wound up being an alternate win condition in Dredge, which is absolutely not what it was designed for. What it was designed for? Who fucking knows? Moonvuli Acid Moss is another bizarre pastiche of cards. It gets its name from Creeping Mold and Acid Rain, but functions like Ice Storm and Nature's Lore stapled together. Moonvuli is just a Jamuran jungle that Teferi phased out with the rest of Zhalfir. I don't really get why they invoked that one, but you may have noticed that this is the second time a card has referenced Creeping Mold. On its face, that's pretty weird. A set full of references to Magic's past, and they double-dipped on Creeping Mold of all things. That is because people fucking loved Creeping Mold. It did a ton of stuff, and the land destruction clause made it feel subversive and cool. In reality, the card sucks, and by the time it was reprinted in original Mirrodin, it was known to be unplayable despite all the artifacts floating around at that point, but sometimes you just like a card, and everyone, fucking everyone, loved Creeping Mold. Tendrils of Corruption is corrupt, but for creatures only. Aaron Doomsayers is just an ace in bureaucrats that checks toughness rather than power. It's also a rebel, for reasons. Thick-Skinned Goblin is just Keeper of Kukis that lets you circumvent echo costs. Viscid Lemures is a take on Hyalopterus Lemure that gets a different kind of evasion. The flavor text is such an obvious pun that it could just go unnoticed, but that is a reference to Magic's past too. We showed you the Dominaria remastered version of Hyalopterus Lemure, but that's not the original printing. This is the original printing. As the story goes, Richard Thomas was assigned Hyalopterus lemur and didn't realize that lemurs and lemurs are in fact two different things. Neither did his art director, but they were in a bind. Wizards of the Coast played a whole lot faster and looser in 1995, and so they were right up against the deadline. The set had to go out. And so, Ice Age went to print with a lemur representing a lemur, which is just Latin for ghost. You gotta admit though, that little guy is really, really cute. Speaking of little guys, Mogwai Marshal is just a little baby Goblin Marshal, and ended up being way more impactful than Goblin Marshal could have ever dreamed of. Swarm Yard! This card's dumb as hell. It's Elephant Graveyard, but it regenerates a bunch of useless shit no one cares about. Just like Elephant Graveyard. Okay, Tivadar of Thorn. It's Knights of Thorn, but with first strike instead of banding, because banding is nonsense. Also, the shoot a goblin when it enters rider is courtesy of Tivadar's Crusade, which boasts a crucified goblin in the artwork. The 90s truly were a different time. Spellburst is Spell Blast with buyback, because who wouldn't want to relive the joy of Forbid? Clockwork Hydra. It's Clockwork Beast plus Spitting Hydra. This one feels like the mashup done right, taking two cards that were appealing in their heyday and transmogrifying them into something appealing for a new audience. Another example of this is Looter Core. It's Merfolk Looter, but instead of an activated ability, it's got Shadow and triggers the loot when it connects, which it always will because Shadow is some cornball shit, but on something like this, it's okay. Looter Core has persisted in queues for the last decade and change because it's simple, it's appealing, and it's got a lot of applications. Ghost Flame Sliver is Ghostly Flame Sliver. I don't know why you would do this. I think this is a take on Striped Bears. No idea why the Nantuko stuff is shoehorned in, but good for them. Skulking Knight. A mashup of Skulking Ghost, or Skulking Fugitive, if that's what you're into, and Shadow Rider, the latter of which is a knight. Okay. Trespasser Ilvek. This thing has Thalicos Drifter's ability and the stats of Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Marauder. Chrono Savant. A mashup of Chronotog and Necrosavant, which brings the count of cards this set double dips on to 4. Castle, Creeping Mold, Two-Headed Giant of Fories, and Chronotog, which, holy shit. I'm not even saying double dipping for a set like this is bad, but why would you double dip on those? Most sets do not put the phrase skip your next turn on a card. In fact, that phrase only shows up on 9 total cards, and Time Spiral is the only set that does it twice. Just in case you were wondering how far off the rails the design and development process for this set went, there is your answer. I have a lot of personal experience with Bogardan Hellkite. This thing was all over the place. People tend to remember Standard from around this time with rose-colored glasses, and it gives me no pleasure to report that the best deck of this era by far was Dragonstorm, and there were few ways for decks to combat it. Putting Dragonstorm and Bogardan Hellkite in the same set isn't the worst bet you can make, but once you factor in the presence of stuff like Gigadrowse and Rite of Flame, you have the makings of a monster. By the way, Bogardan Hellkite is just half of Fiery Justice stapled onto a generic dragon. Screeching Sliver is not Millstone Sliver, it's Hairstrung Kodo Sliver. Vampiric Sliver is Sengir Vampire Sliver minus the flying. Ironclaw Buzzadeers is a mashup of 2 Sly Stalwarts, Ironclaw Orcs and Goblin Balloon Brigade. I think the joke here is that these are like the 2 Sly cards that could never see play again under any circumstances. Icatian Crier is another spell shaper, and this one casts Raise the Alarm, which makes me something of an Icatian Crier myself, because I cast a whole lot of Raise the Alarms and a whole lot of JSSs. Sarpadian Empires, Volume 7, the first Magic card with a fully italicized name. As you might have guessed by the Sarpadian, this is another Fallen Empires thing. Sarpadian Empires is a tome that exists in the Magic universe that tells the story of Fallen Empires and the fall of its 5 factions, and it can be seen in the flavor text throughout the set. Volume 1 kind of sets the stage. These are the dwarves, these are the humans, etc. Volume 2 deals with the thralls overpowering the Order of the Ebon Hand. Volume 3 concerns the fall of the elves at the hands of the Thalids. Volume 4 is about the goblins overtaking the dwarves. Volume 5 is about the Vodalian merfolk and their eventual downfall at the hands of the Homerids. And finally, Volume 6 details the humans' ultimately doomed grapple with the orcs. So then it's implied that Volume 7 is a new volume altogether, unwillingly pulled to the present. You'll notice that the 5 types of creatures it can create are all central to the Fallen Empire's story. It's not a powerful card, but it still kind of works, even if you don't know the backstory. Sudden Shock. It's split-second shock. Scrib Ranger is a lot of shit going on. The activated ability belongs to Quirion Ranger, but it's on Scrib Sprite's body, but it also has Flash and Pro Blue, making it part Wind Reaper Falcon. This card saw play. It wasn't balling out by any means, but Scrib Ranger had some moves. Here's what I didn't know when I was a kid. Dementia Sliver is Nebuchadnezzar Sliver. I'm torn on whether or not this is cool, and I'm leaning towards no. Ivory Giant is the last of the cycle of Big O common suspend creatures, and it casts Blinding Light on entry. Dirkwood Tracker is a tracker that can only target an attacking creature. Neither of these creatures contain the keyword fight in their oracle texts, because their activated abilities only target one creature, where fight targets both. That means that if the tracker, or the Dirkwood Tracker if you're into that kind of thing, leaves play before the ability resolves, it'll still deal its damage. That is neat. Sudden Death is split-second death pulse without all that cycling noise. Dreamstalker's pretty sweet, and it might be one of the biggest reasons I look back on this set so fondly. The lore of this thing is kind of dubious. It's a Dream Prowler, but with completely different mana cost and text. But I want to talk about the gameplay of the thing. So Dreamstalker's at common. You want to know what else is at common in blue? Fathom Seer, Crookclaw Transmuter, and Coral Trickster. It's no Murderer's Row to be sure, but Dreamstalker gives you a great chance to cook while also buying time while the pot simmers. Rebuying Fathom Seer morphs might seem sketchy, but take it from someone who was there. People did it and it worked. Moving from cards that function to cards that aspire to do so, we have Curse of the Cabal. It's a clear callback to Braid's Cabal minion. For the same mana cost to cast Braids, you can suspend Curse of the Cabal to get a one-sided version of Braid's upkeep trigger. Of course, this is Time Spiral, so the execution's a bit more complicated than all that. Defending players can opt out of the Braids trigger, but if they don't, they get a stay of execution, so to speak, keeping the curse on suspend and off of the stack. This is a really weird card if you're not in on the joke, but even if you are, still pretty strange. Call to the Netherworld is just a narrow raised dead that has madness. All we needed was a color-shifted Wild Mongrel and we would have been cooking. I drafted so much Time Spiral and saw this card so little that I still maintain that this thing doesn't actually exist. Stronghold Overseer is a take on Stronghold Taskmaster, I think, but it's got way more going on than that. It's got shades of Ascendant Evencar too. This one might be its own thing. Feebleness is just weakness with flash. Jedit's Dragoons is Radiance Dragoons, but 1,000 times worse. Sengir Nosferatu. This guy was one of my favorites because it's busted. It has all the stats of Sengir Vampire, but instead of dying, it turns into a bat that then turns back into Sengir Nosferatu. Just like a real vampire. Also, just like a real vampire, this thing never fucking dies. It's only a 4/4 flyer, so it's not impossible to manage, but still, the thing never fucking dies. Evangelize is Preacher off a stick, but it's still a repeatable thing thanks to buyback. And you know what? I don't mind buyback on this thing specifically. It's not hard to just outpace it, especially because it costs 9 mana to cast with a buyback. Certainly pairing it with Wrath of God is a different story, but even in that scenario, at least the game's gonna end soon, you know? Children of Corliss is an interesting one. Alright, So there's this old card, Martyrs of Corliss, that absorbs damage you take from artifacts. Children of Corliss is the same idea, but castable and without the artifact rider. I definitely prefer references like this where it replicates function, but not necessarily form. It's how 90s references in 2006 should look. Also turns out it's pretty good with Griselbrand. If you're in the market for a 2/2 for 3 with razor thin upside, then Slipstream Serpent is the card for you. Its text box references a keyword that was obsolete at the time of printing called Landhome. There aren't many creatures with Landhome because the story the mechanic tells is pretty whatever, and the gameplay is even worse than that. Anyway, this thing is a reference to Slipstream Eel that swaps out one onslaught mechanic, cycling, for a different onslaught mechanic, morph. Angel's Grace is a weird one to put in a set with Children of Corliss, but whatever. It gives you a one-shot burst of Platinum Angel plus Worship, so you don't die to an Alpha Strike during cleanup. Angel's Grace has shown up a bunch, most commonly paired with Ad Nauseam to draw your entire deck on the spot. Wormcalling is Ivy Elemental with buyback, but the cluttered text box makes Wormcalling way less appealing than Ivy Elemental ever was. Funny how that works. Cavalry Master is a take on nothing. This feels less like a card and more like a straight-up demonstration of the development team's awareness that flanking stacks. Message received. You are very clever. Ground Rift is just Falter with extra steps. Deep Sea Kraken. I really like this card. It's Tidal Kraken with a funky suspend rider that's pretty counterintuitive to play through. Generally speaking, you want to attack this thing while it's on suspend by simply ignoring that it's there, so that hopefully by the time it comes off suspend, all it can feasibly do is block. I still like it though. Some cards just don't have a statute of limitations for rose-colored glasses, and Deep Sea Kraken is one of those for me. At this point, we're so far deep into this that I feel like I must be doing repeats. I feel like I definitely did this card already, but according to Find and Replace, there's no part of this bloated-ass 13,000-word script that discusses Eternity Snare, so let's do it. It's a cantripping dehydration. Boom. Fortune Thief is Morph Ali from Cairo, which is cool as shit and another example of this set successfully delivering on its premise. It's hard to improve on Ali from Cairo, but Morph opens up some sweet, no blocks before damage, morph my guy, go to 1, kill you on the crackback scenarios. An awesome card, inspired by an awesome card. On its face, Temporal Eddy seems like the kind of card that just plays into the themes of the set. Which it does, but it's also inspired by Temporal Spring. Crookclaw Transmuters is one of my favorite cards in the entire set. It gets its name from Crookclaw Elder, but the only things it shares with that are flying and its types. The real juice in Crookclaw Transmuter is the transmutation part. Oh, Dread Return. By the time it was printed, Dredge already existed, making this one kinda dubious to print. Not only is Dread Return banned in Modern, it's never been legal in Modern, in large part thanks to this little guy that'll see print in the final set of the Time Spiral block, Future Sight. Turns out 0 mana to reanimate a thing is really, really good, especially when you're already spending 0, milling yourself for dozens of cards every turn. On its face, Dread Return is simply very powerful given its fail rate of Zombify, but in the timeline we exist in, it is totally cracked. In the 2000s, Magic sets felt somewhat preoccupied with the Auras problem. The Auras problem is that auras are cool, but they kinda suck. In Magic, creatures inherently have the downside risk that the mana investment in them can get nullified by a cheaper removal spell from an opponent before that creature has a chance to attack or block or generate any value at all. Auras only compound this. Terror on Crawworm is still a 1-for-1 exchange, but once Holy Strength gets in the mix, suddenly that terror exchanges for 2 cards instead of 1. That makes it so that creature auras in particular have a high quality bar to clear in order to be playable. Griffin Guide, a callback to Elephant Guide from Judgment, definitely clears that bar, for limited anyway. Best I can tell, Hivestone's a twist on Conspiracy, but just for slivers. This distinction was more meaningful in 2006 because at that point, 100% of slivers with a static ability granted that ability to all slivers, not just yours. So you could plug Hivestone in a couple different ways. Maybe you want some of your non-slivers to get the abilities of your slivers. Or maybe you're playing against a dedicated sliver deck and you want your creatures to get in on those sweet, sweet abilities. Hivestone was never a serious player in competitive Magic, but it wasn't for a lack of ways to leverage it. Savage Thallid is, I suppose, the teenage version of Feral Thallid. You can see what they were going for, and again, this is an instance where the premise of the set was done justice. Savage Thallid obviously invokes its Feral counterpart while at the same time improving on its design, if not its intent. I get it. This is really deep to go for a set that draws inspiration primarily from Fallen fucking Empires, but we're almost done. Wipe Away is just split-second Boomerang. Triskelevis is Triskelion and Tetravis mixed together. Tolarian Sentinel is a rescue spell shaper. You know it's rescue because its flavor text contains the word rescue, which is one of my favorite cards because the text box is simple and it does its effect for about as cheap as you can get it. It's the kind of thing that made 11-year-old me search high and low for applications for it. I'll say the quiet part out loud. Magic cards do not need a wall of text to be appealing. Riftwing Cloudskate is like reverse Cloudskate, which coincidentally was one of my favorite cards to target with rescue. Its Enter's ability was probably intended to evoke Manowar, but the truth is that Riftwing Cloudskate is the first creature printed that returns a permanent of any type to its owner's hand. This card was standard playable, albeit briefly, and will probably be a mainstay in Vintage Cube right up until this video goes live. Aetherflame Wall is the love child of Wall of Diffusion and Wall of Fire. Terramorphic Expanse, the first fetch land that cared about a land's super type and not necessarily its subtype. Legitimate gripes about constant in-game shuffling aside, Terramorphic Expanse is a sick little bit of technology that is way ahead of its time here, but also probably should have existed in Magic way before it did. It most closely invokes the Bad River cycle from Mirage, but it's totally its own thing and it still persists today, although you probably know it better as Evolving Wilds. Fungus Sliver is Fungosaur Sliver. Flickering Spirit is an homage to Blinking Spirit, which was iconic in competitive Magic's early years because it's fucking impossible to kill. 11 years later, it shows up as an uncommon, which is kinda lame, but it doesn't bounce itself to its hand. What happens is that it casts Flicker on itself for its own mana cost, preserving most of Blinking Spirit's functionality. Yeah, it doesn't protect itself from sweepers anymore, but that's okay. Creatures should be able to be killed. Might Sliver is Double Muscle Sliver. I'm guessing they had to add the 5th mana to its mana value during development, but who knows. Brass Gnat. More like Ass Gnat, you know what I mean? It's Brass Man, but a gnat. Okay. Rift Bolt. It's tempting to call this Lightning Bolt with Suspend, but it is a sorcery, so Volcanic Hammer it is, even though that is 100% not the intent. So in Urza block, there were a bunch of enchantments scattered across the Bant colors that said when your opponents cast something, you know, maybe it's a creature, maybe it's an instant, maybe it's an artifact, whatever. When they satisfy the specific condition, they transform into some creature that's way above rate. Opal Guardian is that, and if it's triple dub mana cost and the creature it becomes seems oddly specific, that's because it's Abbey Gargoyles. Ancient Grudge. Inspired by Ray of Revelation, this thing was the go-to artifact removal card in Modern for years and years. Chameleon Blur is a really weird take on Fog where creatures that are blocked or blocking still deal damage, but the ones that get through don't. Also, I don't really know what's going on in this art. Keldon Halberdier is just Halberdier with Suspend, and an extra point of power for good measure. I think this thing is a riff on Primordial Ooze. Hear me out. Both creatures have to attack every turn. If Primordial Ooze gets up to a 7/7, then you'd have to pay 6 mana in your upkeep. Tectonic Fiend makes you pay 6 during your upkeep too. It's not a perfect 1-to-1, but it is a clever way to both fill out a card file and drag Primordial Ooze kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Trompe the Domains is one of the cooler cards in the entire set, marrying all-time classic Overrun with the domain mechanic that was introduced in Invasion but didn't get a keyword till Conflux. That's an 8-year gap between introduction of the mechanic and introduction of the keyword. Basil Sliver is Basil Thrall Sliver. Candles of Lang. This one might actually be the dumbest card in the set. At least Cyclopean Giant attacks and blocks. Okay, so what we have here is a combination of Jayemdae Tome and Library of Lang, but without the Spellbook Writer, and also the activated ability is 1,000 times worse than Jayemdae Tome because, what, the thing costs 2? This was a rare. God, stupid dog shit card. Psionic Sliver is Psionic Entity Sliver. In the lore, Scion of the Ur-Dragon shares a characteristic with each of the primeval dragons. Okay, so you've got the Elder Dragons, those are from Legends. And then the primeval dragons, which are the second generation of Dominarian dragons, were depicted in Invasion. Those are the ones that all kind of funnel up into the Ur-Dragon, and by extension, it's Scion. Urza Block had 2 creatures with the affix Skittering. Skittering Scourge and Skittering Horror. Both are above rate black creatures that die the second you cast another creature. Believe it or not, Skittering Monstrosity is kind of that too, even though a 5/5 for 5 isn't even that good anymore, let alone one with a drawback. Mindlash Sliver is Mind/Sliver. Fortify is, for all intents and purposes, a split card under a unified mana cost. You either get Shield Wall or Army of Allah. Pentarch Paladin is just one of those cards. It's a play on the Cardinal Direction Paladins, and my little kid brain really, really wanted it to be good. I mean, look at it. It's a 3/3 that kills creatures of any color you want. How could it be bad? Turns out very easily. It's a 3/3 for 5, which sucked even back then. The flanking is fake because why would you ever attack with it? It's not good, but it's pretty damn appealing. Fittingly, our last card is yet another pay-in to Fallen Empires. Thallid Germinator is a fixed Thallid Devourer. Yeah, that's it. That's Time Spiral. So, what did we learn from this little exercise? I'd say our takeaways are mostly trivia related, but let's go back to movies for a second. Films can suck for all kinds of reasons. For the purposes of Time Spiral, let's settle on movies that suck because their premise is cool but ultimately doesn't have a lot of meat on the bone. A lot of Saturday Night Live movies fall into this category. The sketches they're based on work, but the premises ultimately aren't deep enough to support a feature film. In the same vein, making a Jaya Ballard card is cool. A Norin the Wary card, not so much. It's not that there weren't enough iconic cards, it's more that a lot of them were inappropriate for play once people figured out how Magic worked. That casts a net that's inclusive of anti-cards, Ancestral Recall, Charizard, Mox Ruby. They told on themselves a lot with the cards they chose to make. Nothing new there. On the other hand, without Candles of Lang, we wouldn't have Lotus Bloom.